going to take a look at extinction in a little bit more detail. But specifically, we're going to spend most of the class today watching the video Harry. So this is the treatment of a self-injurious individual who had to be institutionalized because he would injure himself so badly. And the work of a psychologist using an extinction procedure, and also many of the things that we have encountered so far in this class in order to completely turn this individual's life around. So before we get to that, just a couple of more details on extinction. So if you recall previously, we defined extinction as the non-reinforcement of a previously reinforced response. So this is when you stop reinforcement on a response that had previously been reinforced. So it used to result in the consequence of reinforcement. Now that results in no consequence whatsoever, nothing occurs. So if you go through the extinction procedure, the strength of that behavior will decrease. It'll decrease in its strength, it'll decrease in its probability, it'll decrease in its frequency. So if Sniffy over here, if the rat over here was reinforced previously for pressing the bar, we could go through an extinction procedure where that bar press was no longer reinforced with food. So keep your eye out for this extinction procedure being used to treat Harry. It's going to be in there stacked on top of other contingencies as well. But definitely you will hear information that Harry used to be reinforced for his self-injurious behavior. So he would injure himself, and that would be followed up by a consequence that was reinforcing for Harry. And you're going to see that the main way that Dr. Fox will treat Harry is by no longer reinforcing that self-injurious behavior. That is eventually going to make the self-injury decrease. However, as we introduced last time, extinction also has side effects that oftentimes make the extinction look like it's not necessarily working. So we already covered extinction burst, and extinction burst is that temporary increase in the frequency and the intensity of a response once extinction is implemented. So once extinction begins, once that procedure begins, the behavior actually that you're trying to get rid of gets worse, has a burst of energy almost, and that is that extinction burst. So keep an eye out for the extinction burst in the treatment of Harry. We didn't get to, we mentioned the increase in variability. So the increase in the variability of the response. So whereas the response might have been very uniform, once extinction is implemented, the variability of the response will change. So you'll see that Harry predominantly hits himself with his fist. So once the extinction procedure is implemented, look for other behaviors that are self-injury but different than what he's doing before. That's that increase in variability. We're also going to see emotional behavior. You're going to see a lot of emotional behavior. We're probably going to have to close the door because Harry has tons of emotional behavior. And this is typically what a layperson would describe as frustration. So again, indication that the extinction procedure is working. You're going to see a lot of frustration in Harry's responses to his treatment. You're going to see a lot of aggression. So aggression is another side effect of extinction. So you're going to see frustration-induced aggressive behaviors from Harry. And Harry's actually a really nice guy, so he does have aggression, but he doesn't take it out on his actual, the people treating him. So keep an eye out for aggression. But again, this is a side effect specific to extinction. Usually, when somebody gets reinforced, you don't aggress to the person that is reinforcing you. So for example, Children, in just a couple of days, are going to get reinforced for the behavior of going up to a house and saying trick or treat. They're going to be given a candy, right? It's very rare that a child goes up and says trick or treat, and then they get candy and they're like, oh man, you gave me candy, and they aggress against the person giving them candy. That doesn't happen. But when you're going through extinction, that does. So look for aggression. Look for resurgence. So resurgence is when a previously used behavior that used to be successful comes back once another behavior is going through the extinction procedure. So a clear example of this is if you had a child, we'll go back to the supermarket example, if you had a child that would yell in the supermarket until you gave them a candy bar, and you decided to go through extinction where they would no longer receive a candy bar for yelling in a supermarket, they might cry for the first time in years trying to get what they want. Crying used to be effective when they were a toddler at getting their, being reinforced. So that can reemerge, that can go through resurgence where they might not have cried for years, but now all of a sudden that behavior reemerges. Depression and depression-like symptoms are often a side effect of extinction. Basically, nobody likes to go through extinction. It's not a pleasant experience. So you can also look for those side effects in the treatment of Harry. Now, because of these side effects, procedures have been developed to minimize these side effects. So the big one that we're going to see, and one of the best ways to minimize these side effects, is called the differential reinforcement of other behavior. And what differential reinforcement of other behavior, or DRO, is, it's basically there on the tin. It's where you reinforce other behavior. So it's a concurrent schedule, meaning that it's a schedule stacked on top of another schedule. So it's two schedules going at the same time. But whereas with just an extinction procedure, you would no longer reinforce behavior A, in a differential reinforcement of other behavior, you don't reinforce behavior A, but you would reinforce another behavior, a more appropriate behavior. So if you're trying to get the rat to stop pressing the bar, and all you're doing is an extinction procedure, that rat might think, oh my goodness, I'm going to starve. Right? How do I get food? I used to press a bar for food. How am I going to get food? And those extinction side effects are going to be massive. If, on the other hand, you say, well, you can't bar press for food, but if you jump up and down, I'll give you food, then it makes the extinction procedure a whole lot easier because the rat can still get to food. So you're going to see this in Harry's treatment as well. They're going to go through the extinction procedure for his self-injurious behavior, but they're also going to take a look at and reinforce other appropriate behaviors. Good behaviors, beneficial behaviors will receive reinforcement, and that is the key to the differential reinforcement of other behavior. Some of the behavior is going through extinction, other behavior is being reinforced, and that's that differential reinforcement of other behavior. So again, we have an extinction and a reinforcement procedure occurring at exactly the same time. And if you want to make it very effective, what you can do is you can choose two incompatible behaviors, and that's called the differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. So pay attention specifically to the behaviors that Dr. Fox and his colleagues picked, and try to identify behaviors that they ask Harry to do that specifically cannot be done while Harry is self-abusing. And those instances are the very effective form of differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. All right, so keep an eye out on all of that in today's class for today's video. Any questions before we begin the video? All right, so I will see if I need to close the door or put the volume down But without further ado, this is the treatment of Harry. All right, so just real quick, that right there is a description of the reinforcement of the self-abuse that had previously occurred. So Harry would use his self-abuse to control other people in his world. So if they placed a demand on Harry, Harry would self-abuse, they would take the demand away. You need to do some homework, Harry would self-abuse, they take the homework away. And that was a form of negative reinforcement for that self-abuse. So it was previously reinforced. So when Dr. Fox starts treating Harry, make a note of what happens to the task that Dr. Fox is asking Harry to do after Harry self-abuses. And you will see that instead of removing the task, as soon as Harry returns, the task is still there. It was not removed, hence no reinforcement for the self-abuse. That is the extinction procedure. All right, so remember this baseline condition. This is how much Harry self-abused out of restraints before treatment occurs. And compare this to his endpoint in treatment, and you'll see just how powerful the techniques that we're learning about here actually are in shaping human behavior. Okay, so this is a great example of two things that we were looking at. Number one, first, this is the first really clear example that they have in the video of the extinction procedure. So it's implied that they were under the extinction procedure. Harry was not being reinforced for his self-injurious behavior. So this is the first completely explicit account of that extinction procedure because Dr. Fox had placed a task before Harry. He said, Harry, we're gonna play some ball, right? We're gonna play some ball. And then Harry self-abused and they left the room and placed Harry in timeout. Notice that when they come back right now, what are they gonna do? They're doing the exact same thing. They're gonna play ball. So the self-abuse did nothing. It didn't take away the ball playing activity. It was not negatively reinforced. It's through the extinction procedure, there was nothing that the self-abuse did. It didn't do anything to change the task. So that's the clearest example we've had so far of the extinction procedure. And then also, the counting that they had Harry do, that was differential reinforcement of other behavior. So they were allowing Harry to be reinforced. They were allowing Harry to get his restraints back, not by self-abusing, but by actually doing a task, another task, an appropriate task, like counting. Now, counting is differential reinforcement of other behavior because you can still self-abuse while you count. You can literally count how often you're self-abusing while you're counting to 100. So the fact that you can do both of those at the same time makes it slightly less effective than this task over here, which is the ball catching, which is the differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. Because if you're catching a ball, you're doing something with your hands. And if you're holding a ball and catching a ball, it's really hard to kind of self-abuse. So it's incompatible with self-abuse. That makes it a more effective differential reinforcement of, in this case, incompatible behavior. So once again, though very important for our extinction, look, Harry self-abused, and it got him nowhere because we're going right back to the task that was being demanded of him prior to self-abuse. They're going right back to ball throwing. All right, so this is another great example right here of the differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. So we've just seen Dr. Fox pour himself a Coke. We know he has the skills to pour himself a Coke, but he wants to give Harry a task to do that is incompatible with self-abuse, and a fine motor task like pouring a beverage into a cup is something that is incompatible, again, with abusive, self-injurious behavior. So once again, this idea of allowing him to get reinforcement still, but with appropriate behaviors, and if it's incompatible with self-abuse, that's the most effective form of that differential reinforcement of other behavior. All right, so just to kind of show you the effectiveness of these treatments, and it's kind of, I've seen this one a lot, so I know the timeline of this. 25 years of self-abuse, 25 years that Harry has been institutionalized because the self-abuse was just too much for other people to handle. This is one treatment day, and it was a long day as they mentioned, but by the end of it, they got him up to almost 18 minutes with no self-abuse, and that is one day of applying the principles that we're learning in this class. So just to kind of give you an indication, 25 years of no progress, but if you know what you're doing and you know how learning operates, one day they got him to 18 minutes with no self-abuse. All right, that was the treatment of Harry. So, all right. So, so that was the treatment, and as you saw, they had the extinction procedure that they put into place. Harry was no longer being reinforced for his self-abuse, and they also had the differential reinforcement of other behavior. We saw tons of extinction side effects, and also we saw many of the things that we have encountered so far in this semester. So this was almost like a synopsis of the semester so far in terms of many of the procedures that they used. Now, next class, we're going to delve into this video in more depth, just to kind of analyze it all out and point out many of the different features as a sort of example of the psychology of learning. But before we wrap up today's class, any questions, any comments on the treatment of Harry or extinction, differential reinforcement in general?
It was sad when you watch it.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It was hard to watch it. I mean, I watch this about 4 times a year, minimum. I try to stick it in just about every class that I have, and so many times I know he's going to hit himself, and I just kind of I'm like, Harry, don't do it, not this time. And you just hear him, and you can hear him. That's the thing. Like it's not a little tap. It's hard. Like the microphone's in the other room, and you can hear the psh, psh when he does it, and it's one of those great examples. And we'll talk about this more, where people cared for Harry, and they didn't know the psychology of learning. And they actually made his situation worse. So we're going to see how caring people with the best of intentions, without the knowledge of psychology, made the situation worse. And you contrast that with Dr. Fox, who is basically, if you don't understand what he's doing, one of the biggest bullies that Harry has ever encountered. Because what does Dr. Fox do? He takes away the one thing that Harry likes. He takes away his restraints. And what does he do? He makes him do things to get them back. And literally, he's like the meanest guy if you don't understand what's going on. And yet, he's the one that turned around everything. And again, take a look at where Harry was for 25 years. Remember, this is not a recent development. 25 years he lived his life like that. In 2 years, he's off learning skills, enjoying life. Yep.
I was just like thinking, like, what would they have done if like the restraints didn't like make him happier or like didn't calm him down? Like, would they just have to find something else that did?
Yes, they needed to find a reinforcer. So we'll go over all this in detail, but when they saw his pattern of self-abuse, because it was they used this phrase, a high stable rate of self-abuse, they knew he was being reinforced. And they knew he was being reinforced on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. So as soon as they knew that he was being reinforced through the self-abuse, they knew that they had to go through the extinction procedure. And then what they needed to do is they needed to find something to reinforce the other behavior. And they used other things other than the restraints. They used like Cokes and pretzels, and they used a lot of verbal, good boy, here's a hug, pat on the back. But they used the restraints, and just to kind of foreshadow what we're going to take a look at, they knew that the restraints were going to be reinforcing because they mentioned that Harry continuously wore the restraints. And that means that his preferred level of wearing restraints was 24 hours a day. That's how much he would wear the restraints if left to his own devices. So what did they do? They restricted his access to the restraints, dropped it below his preferred level, and that meant that they guaranteed that those restraints would then be reinforcing. So if Harry didn't wear the restraints all the time, they would have to determine another potential reinforcer. But it's a very interesting kind of study, and notice also that they never completely eliminated the restraints. So even at the end of it, he's wearing eyeglasses. He doesn't need eyeglasses. Eyeglasses are his preferred method of restraint. So in essence, he's still under treatment. Even though he no longer self-abuses, he's still under treatment. They still have to maintain, be very contingent with Harry. They mentioned that as well. And all of that, again, is that kind of treatment procedures that we've been encountering so far this semester. Yep.
After the first treatment was implemented, during the time between when Dr. Fox left and came back, was his treatment continued by other caretakers?
My guess, because they didn't explicitly mention it, I would think not. I think they probably went back to business as usual for Harry, which would probably be keeping him in restraints, except for that brief time when he needed to shower and take care of personal hygiene. That would be my guess, but it's not made completely explicit. Mm-hmm.
So after the 2 weeks where he wasn't there, after 2 weeks, where when they showed like him like out of all frustration, was that an example of extinction burst or no?
So Extinction Burst would be a little difficult to say, oh, this is exactly Extinction Burst, because you would have to compare it to the baseline phase. And you heard them in the baseline. What they were doing is they were counting how often Harry abused in 5-second intervals, so they could get like an average, number of abuses per second. So you would have to compare his extinction levels to his baseline levels. If they're higher, that would be an example of Extinction Burst. They definitely seemed to be more powerful. They definitely seemed to be stronger. And we definitely saw things like variability. So he would never abuse the doors, but then all of a sudden he was smashing, his fist on the doors. But specifically the moment that you're talking about, when they came back for the second day and they took him out of restraints, that was their reversal design in this treatment. Because when they first treated Harry and they got to the end of the day and he was over 17 minutes out of restraints, they don't know, was it the treatment that caused that reduction in self-abuse, or was it something else? Was something else that happened to Harry on that day? Was it the fact that he's intimidated by Dr. Fox? Was it that he got tired after ripping through 6 or 7 shirts that day, and that's why he no longer self-abused? They didn't know if it was something else. So what they did is they reversed it. They returned the baseline and said, basically, you're free to self-abuse, there's no consequences, and his self-abuse popped right back up. And by removing that treatment, they made sure it's not the ripping of the shirts, it's not Dr. Fox, it's not something else, it was a treatment. And then you can see that they reinstituted the treatment. That's that return to the treatment condition, and then they kept it. He was in some form of treatment, earning back his restraints for the rest of his life, really. All right, any final questions? We will delve into all of this in more detail next class. I will post a link where you can watch this again if you want to review it, but if there's no other questions, we are done for today.